Welcome everybody. My name is Siyam. I'm Squamish. My mother was Nuchal. I don't have a big presentation. I don't really have anything ready. I can tell you that I'm a canoe puller of the North Van Canoe Club, but I've always been a paddler, and that's all I've ever loved is going out in a canoe. Our canoe club, the oldest picture we have is 1890. I try to imagine what it was like back then. In the picture you can see sailing boats in the background. It's over by, where Stanley Park is now. You just have to look up Vancouver old pictures and you'll get a look at it. There's actually two pictures and it's pretty amazing in them. Chief Joe Capilano, he was one of our greatest chiefs. Whenever you hear the word Capilano, that was who they're talking about. He was in a brass uniform, brass buttons, and we must have had a brass band back then, and I guess we're all very, very musical. I think it was 1870 when my grandmother told me that her grandmother told her that she's seen them drop smallpox on our shores. So that picture being in 1890, we were being hit by smallpox at that time. My grandmother was an orphan, and she was adopted by Louis Miranda, who was a great chief, or a great man from our people, and he used to take care of this church and ring the bell when I was a little kid. And he'd tell me all kinds of stories, and because he raised my grandmother, who was considered our grandfather, and he lived a couple doors over, so my dad would always tell me to go visit him. So I'd go sit and listen to him tell stories, and they weren't like regular stories that you read in the books about Uncle Louis. They weren't about legends and stuff like that. They were about his life and stuff. And I got to see a side of him that few people got to see, but he'd also tell me canoe stories, and I'll never forget one time when I first started paddling, I must have been about 15, I came and tried to explain to him my problem, and I was saying, I don't want to be doing that stuff because I don't want to be bad out there. I want to be like my dad. He goes, your dad? And he couldn't stop laughing, and I said, my dad is the most honest paddler or something like that, and it just made him laugh so hard. He said, your dad is the worst out there. He's bumping everybody and hooking everybody. And I said, oh, that's where I get that from. Okay, I felt better about that. I remember one time I told him, I made this strip double, and it was one of the first canoes that I ever made like that. And it was made out of strips, so I got to make it super light, like half the weight of a regular dugout. Like when I learned to build canoes for my dad, we always build dugouts. We dig them out of a log, and they all weigh about 100 pounds or 80 pounds or something. But this canoe is like super, super light, and we start winning. Me and my cousin, Angie Paul, we got to the races, and I'll never forget it. I was sitting on the dock, and the judges were behind me, and her dad was there, and her uncle, and they were growing people, and they were putting their fists up, and I was like, oh, God damn. So I went back to my Uncle Louis, and I went back to my grandpa, and I said, I don't want to hurt the sport. And he said, if you can do anything to make your canoe faster, you do it. So in the end, you're not going to have any regrets. So I've paddled since I was 10 years old or whatever, 5 years old. And, I've always held that close to my heart, is if you can do anything, make your canoe go faster. So a lot of people look at us when we use modern technology or modern tools to build our canoes, and they're like, that's not cultural, or that's not what your people used to do. And I think to myself, we're not allowed to evolve culturally. I mean, my dad went through residential school, and by the time he came out, they stripped everything. He knew very little about our stuff. And it was funny because things that he did do, like he'd tell me things that come from the longhouse. He'd tell me that you got to sit by the water when you go race. You got to study the water. And to me, I thought that had to do with currents, tides, stuff like that. So I studied the water, and I studied tide drifts and different things. And I think he was talking about the water as a being. You have to agree with it. It has to agree with you. And I couldn't quite get that for the longest time until recently. The scientists in China and Brazil and stuff are starting to discover that water has memory, that water has feelings, that you can have a glass of water and another glass of water, and you can say bad things to one water and it affects the water. And if you turn it into ice, you'll see inside the ice that it changes it on a molecular level. That's what my dad was talking about when he said, you got to sit by the water and agree with the water. And he'd tell me when you take a tree and you're going to make a canoe out of it, you can't just walk up to it and start hitting it with an axe. You have to sit with it. In the morning when you first get there, you got to sit down beside it and you have to agree with it. And I could never quite get that part either. And recently my daughter came home from university and she said that they're starting to study trees, and trees have families in the forest and they take care of each other. And this is scientific proof that, they talk to each other and they take care of each other and they have their own language and stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's what he's talking about. And I didn't have a grandpa per se, besides a grandpa that was my blood grandpa. He passed away before I was born, so I didn't get to see him. But I moved to Chilliwack and I lived with Andy Commodore and adopted him as my grandpa. When I first met him, he told me that little men will come and help you when you need help with the canoe. And I thought he was telling me legends and stuff. And a few years went by and it was Remembrance Day, and I couldn't move this log. It was up on the hill and I had to move it down. And I tried to use this little Vespa as a little car, and the wheels would just spin and I couldn't move the log. And he kept saying, Gary's going to get his tractor up here. He'll help you move it on the weekend. And I was going nuts waiting, and I wanted to move the log down the hill and I couldn't move it down the hill. And about 4 days went by, and then I went to talk to the old man about it, and I was telling him, I can't move this log. And he said, well, come take me driving today. And so we went to see all his buddies from the war, and went to the Elder Center, and we wound up at the Longhouse, and we spent the whole day driving, and then went back to his house. And the next morning I woke up really early, and it was pretty late. It was like December, I think, or November. It was cold. He lived up on a mountain. And I got up in the morning and I dug 2 holes in the ground, and I hunkered down and I grabbed a hold of the log, and I was telling myself, I'm going to push this log. And I lifted it up first, and I put some oil underneath there, and I made the sap, touch the sap so that it would slide. I hunkered down on the ground, and I grabbed onto that log, and I started pushing, and I told myself, I'm going to do whatever I got to do. I'm going to keep on going. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to do everything I can. I don't care if I empty my tank. I'm going to keep going, and I'm just going to go. And I start pushing on the log and pushing on the log and pushing on the log. And I don't know how long went by, but a long time went by, and I was pushing on the log, and then I thought I felt it move. I don't know how that could be possible, because the log's 50 feet and it's not dug out yet. It's solid log. And I kept pushing and pushing, and I started pushing harder and pushing harder. And then it moved. And then it started sliding down the hill, and I started running with it. And I thought, if it goes over the side of the mountain, it's going to be gone. Because he lived up on this mountain hill, and it slid right in the perfect spot, and it stopped. And I was like, damn, I can't believe that. How can a man move a log? Rolled it over, and I started carving it. And at supper time, me and my grandpa Andy, we were sitting there. I told him about the log, and so cool about it. He just relaxed, said, it's the little men. I'll never forget that. So I want to name my next canoe. Funny thing, we got lots of canoes, but I don't have a race single right now. So I want to name my next canoe Little Man. I was thinking a lot about things in the past. Like when my mom passed, I was thinking, she always wanted me to be a chief. I actually ran for council once, and I got really close to it, and I couldn't handle those meetings. I couldn't handle that arguing. I couldn't handle, that's just not me. I'm a canoe builder. And I used to listen to meetings, and I thought, this is what they do every day, all year long. I can't do this. So I changed my mind. I didn't make it, so lucky I didn't make it. I changed my mind, and I didn't go down that path. But when my mom passed recently, I thought about that quite a bit. I didn't do what she wanted me to do. And we're Native people, basically, and this political system that we got has been put on us. And I guess for the time being, we have to make do with what they've given us and learn how to use it, much like the chainsaws and the planers, and figure out how to make it work. But I couldn't do that political stuff. I couldn't get into it. I think it's really important for me, because I know I only got my short life, and it's really short, and I know that I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be out in that canoe, because that's what I love, is that canoe. That's the only thing I love. It's like Christmas to me. So I teach the kids how to build canoes, and I teach my son and my nephews, and we dig out logs, and we try to make the fastest canoes we can make. That's pretty much what we do. Thank you. Welcome from Squamish. Welcome.
Great. No, that's great. And what stuck out to me was definitely the experience. right? It's one thing to know about it, maybe read it in a book or a manual, but to get out on the land and experience it, it's totally different. Max, thank you so much. And now I would like to call upon Siyam.
Thank you, Nick, for asking me to speak. But Nick, I certainly want to thank you very much for sharing the Tsm'syen way of life, the history, contemporary, but more so the meaning of your family, the longhouses, and what it means to be Tsm'syen. In my experience working with Squamish Nation for 47 years, both as a counselor, unfortunately, I'm one of those guys that got into the colonial council. I was a social worker for 7 years and a band manager for 28 years. I went through the residential school system from grade 1 to grade 8 and then on to a Catholic school from grade 9 to grade 12. Then I went to UBC for social work. We, as First Nations people, from my experience, and there was a lot of great leaders who aspired to the way you're thinking today, and as did our great leaders, the late Andy Hall. You know, the young people today, at least I've noticed in the last 30, 40 years, they are hungry and thirsty for their identity, their heritage, their language, but more so they're just hungry to know how it impacted them and how they can make things better for their children. You know, when I think of the chiefs in the 1960s, the Allied chiefs in the you had mentioned in 1926 or 25, I think at that time the Native Brotherhood was the main was the main Native organization. I remember Kitty Bell, who was a writer, and that Ed Nahaney, who was the administrator, and he knew all the First Nations people all along the coast, all the fishermen, probably even the Tsm'syen people probably knew of him. But Ed Newman was very much part of that too. You all probably know the legacy of Ed Newman, who was a great leader for the Native Brotherhood. It was the Native Brotherhood that started the whole aspiration of Indigenous rights and Aboriginal title land claims. I'm 79, I'm going on 80 soon, but I never got a chance to learn my culture or my language. I'm a survivor of 8 years of residential school. You know, I'm just one of those persons that just survived, but you don't have to go into great detail. You already know we all had the similar experience. If not, your parents or grandparents had that same experience of denial and deprivation of your heritage, yourself, you know, pride, dignity, all that was taken away. But anyway, when I worked for the Squamish Nation, I try to do my best in trying to band-aid the wounds of past generations or the existing wounds of the generation I worked with. There was a lot of bad things happened to our people. I had 2 brothers that died of heroin overdoses. I had 2 brothers that went to jail. And but that wasn't common. But a lot of our people went through a lot of suffering. They didn't have any services or anybody to support them. There were no support systems during the 1960 schools, the residential schools. Incarceration is still going on, and 40% of our First Nations people are in jail. And there's a lot of pain going on right there. We're all touched by that. I was happy to hear Nick, the way he spoke. He inspired me, actually. And I think you're more polished than you realize there, Nick. Maybe a little more polished here and there, you'll be super. You carry on what you're doing. You spoke very well, and you put it in you capsulized the whole thing, the history of your people, to see it on how you presented that. I hope to see Squamish Nation do the same. We're working on our history too, our heritage, our background, and it's taking time, but our First Nations people are at a moment of history in time where our young ones will help put us in the path we want to be, and that is the rightful place of where we belong as First Nations people in Canada, but more so that we can make Canada a better country. Because in us we have compassion and love. We still have nature inside of us. And Canadian society needs that. And that's why I'm still optimistic that we still can teach the white man to be a better person. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear a lot of the same sentiments to various communities that we go, and I believe people are hungry for that as well, that experience and that knowledge and that wisdom. And that's exactly what we intend to put forward as we proceed